Ironwood Falls, Colorado, 1878. The sun bled crimson across the jagged peaks of the San Juan Mountains, casting long shadows over the dusty streets of Ironwood Falls. Three riders tore through the town's main drag, their coal-black Mustangs kicking up clouds of grit that swirled like phantoms in the fading light. Long duster coats flapped behind them, dark as raven wings, their silhouettes cutting a menacing figure against the fiery horizon. Hooves pounded the packed earth, a drumbeat of trouble, as they reined up before the weathered facade of the Last Chance Saloon. Inside, Nora Caldwell stood behind the bar, her movements as precise as a metronome. She polished a whiskey glass with a linen cloth, her slate-blue eyes flicking toward the saloon's wide front windows. At 42, Nora carried herself with the quiet grace of a woman who'd seen the world's edges and chosen to carve her own place within it. Her auburn hair, streaked with silver, was pinned in a practical bun, framing a face both striking and weathered, with cheekbones sharp as a Bowie knife. Beneath the bar, hidden from view, rested her father's custom Colt single-action army, its walnut grip worn smooth by years of use. It hadn't been drawn in 7 years, not since she'd buried her husband, Henry, and sworn off the life she'd once led. But Nora's instincts, honed by a past she kept locked away, never dulled. The Last Chance Saloon was the heart of Ironwood Falls, a silver mining town that had boomed and busted in the shadow of Colorado's unforgiving peaks. Its oak-planked walls bore the scars of blizzards and bullet holes, yet Nora kept it pristine, a testament to her stubborn pride. The hand-painted sign above the entrance, a pair of crossed revolvers beneath a lone star, swayed in the evening breeze, catching glints of sunlight like a gunslinger's badge. Inside, brass lanterns cast a warm glow, and a spotless mirror stretched behind the bar, reflecting a room that was equal parts sanctuary and stage. Unlike the rowdy dives of Denver or Tombstone, the Last Chance had no sawdust floors or spittoons. Nora swept the boards twice daily, ensuring her patrons could sip their rye without wading through filth. "Another Ms. Caldwell?" asked Amos Turner, a grizzled prospector whose silver beard matched the ore he chased. He'd been nursing the same glass of whiskey for an hour, his weathered hands cradling it like a prayer. "Last one before supper, Amos," Nora replied, her voice carrying a faint Boston lilt, a remnant of her upbringing that still intrigued the locals. She poured a modest refill, her eyes never straying far from the windows. "Clara says you promised to eat with her and the grandkids tonight." Amos chuckled, caught in his dodge. "You got a memory sharper than a gambler's blade, Nora. Ain't nothing slips past you." He raised his glass in salute, but Nora's attention had already shifted. Outside, the three riders dismounted, their spurs jangling with the swagger of men who thrived on fear. Her right hand drifted beneath the bar, fingers brushing the Colt's grip, a reflex from a life she tried to forget. Through the windows, Nora studied them with a marksman's precision. The leader, a tall man with a scarred face, moved with the coiled menace of a rattlesnake. His coat hung heavy on one side, hinting at a shoulder holster. The second, broad-shouldered and square-jawed, carried himself like a soldier, his eyes scanning the street with methodical sweeps. The third, younger and twitchy, had bruised knuckles and a poorly hidden knife in his boot. Nora's mind clicked through calculations, distances to cover, angles of fire, potential obstacles. Old habits, buried but never dead. The batwing doors swung open with a creak, and silence fell over the saloon's afternoon crowd. Conversations died, cards froze mid-deal, and every eye turned to the newcomers. Nora recognized the leader instantly, Silas Kane, enforcer for the Carson Syndicate, a gang that had been bleeding small towns dry from Wyoming to New Mexico. His scarred face twisted into a smile that didn't reach his eyes, a predator sizing up a room of prey. Nora kept her expression neutral, though her senses catalogued every detail. Kane's boots scuffed the clean floor, his spurs chiming like a funeral bell. The soldierly man, known only as Holt per wanted posters, stood a step behind, his hand resting near his hip. The young one, called Rattler for his knife work, fidgeted, his eyes darting like a cornered coyote. "Gentlemen," Nora said, her voice steady as a gun sight. "Welcome to the last chance." "What'll it be?" Kane sauntered to the bar, removing his hat with mock courtesy. His dark hair, streaked with premature gray, framed a face that might have been handsome before the scars. "Miss Caldwell, I presume. Word is your whiskey's the finest this side of the Rockies." His voice was smooth as snake oil, but his eyes were cold, calculating. "You have me at a disadvantage, sir," Nora replied, though she knew exactly who he was. The saloon was a tomb of silence now, the regulars clutching their drinks, sensing the storm brewing. "Silas Kane at your service." He offered a slight bow, his smile sharp as a razor. "My associates and I are just passing through your fine town, looking to sample some of that famous hospitality." Nora's hands moved with practiced ease, setting out 3 glasses and pouring from a bottle of decent rye, not her private stock, but good enough to avoid insult. Her movements were unhurried, deliberate, though her senses remained razor-sharp. "First rounds on the house," she said. "Welcome to Ironwood Falls." Kane raised an eyebrow at the liquor's quality, swirling the glass. "Generous of you, Miss Caldwell. Not every saloon we visit rolls out the red carpet." "Courtesy's cheap and pays dividends," Nora replied, her gaze locking with his. Beneath the bar, her left foot nudged a specific floorboard, a signal to her barkeep, Big Jim Callahan, who was in the storeroom. Trouble was afoot. Kane took a slow sip, his eyes never leaving hers. "True enough. But real generosity. That takes commitment." He set his glass down with a deliberate clink. "Which brings me to why we're here. My employer, Mr. Ezekiel Carson, has taken a shine to Ironwood Falls. Sees potential in this dusty little burg." Several patrons quietly paid their tabs and slipped out, sensing the conversation's dangerous turn. Nora gave Amos a subtle nod, and the old prospector hesitated before grabbing his hat and heading for the door. "Ironwood Falls is a simple mining town, Mr. Kane," she said once the room had thinned. "Our potential's about tapped out." Kane's chuckle was dry as desert wind. "That's where vision comes in, Miss Caldwell. Mr. Carson's got vision to spare. Sees opportunities where others see dirt." He gestured at the saloon. "This place, for instance. Prime spot, solid trade. But under the right management, it could be a gold mine." Nora's face remained a mask, though her mind raced through tactical assessments. 3 visible threats, possible backup outside, Colt within reach, scattergun under the staircase 12 feet away. "The last chance ain't for sale, Mr. Kane," she said flatly. The young one, Rattler, shifted, his hand twitching toward his knife, but Kane raised a hand to still him. "Now, Miss Caldwell, nobody's talking sale just yet. Think of it as a partnership. Mr. Carson provides protection, handles the messy details a widow might find taxing, and takes a fair cut of the profits. Say 50%. Holt spoke for the first time, his Texas drawl thick as molasses. "That's the reasonable figure Mr. Carson has in mind." Nora poured herself a small glass of rye, letting the silence stretch. "Mr. Kane, I've run this saloon just fine since Henry passed. I don't need protection or partners." She took a measured sip. "Tell Mr. Carson I appreciate his interest, but I'm not interested." Kane's charm slipped, a flicker of anger crossing his face before he reined it in. "Ms. Caldwell, you don't seem to grasp the nature of Mr. Carson's offer. It ain't the kind folks usually turn down." "I understand perfectly," Nora replied, her voice dropping to a glacial calm. "And my answer stands." The Batwing doors swung open again, and Big Jim Callahan stepped through, his 6'4" frame filling the doorway. The former blacksmith's shoulders were broad as an ox yoke, his dark eyes scanning the room before settling on Nora. "Everything all right, Miss Caldwell?" he rumbled, his voice a low thunder. "Just fine, Jim," Nora said, her eyes still locked on Kane. "Our guests were just leaving." Kane's gaze flicked between Nora and Jim, reassessing. After a moment, he drained his glass and set it down with a slow, deliberate motion. "Very well, Miss Caldwell. We won't take more of your time today." He donned his hat, tipping it slightly. "But Mr. Carson's a persistent man. Doesn't take kindly to refusal." "Nor do I," Nora replied, her tone as unyielding as iron. Kane's smile was thin as a blade. "We'll be in town a few days. Maybe you'll see the wisdom of Mr. Carson's protection. Bad things happen in these wild parts: fires, vandalism, accidents." Nora's eyes narrowed. "You threatening me, Mr. Kane?" "Just statin' facts, ma'am. World's a dangerous place." He nodded to his men, and they moved toward the doors. At the threshold, Kane paused, glancing back. "Oh, and Sheriff Dawson sends his regards. Says he's real sorry he had to rush off to see his sick ma in Denver." The doors swung shut behind them, leaving a heavy silence. Jim turned to Nora, concern etching his broad face. "Those were Carson's men, weren't they? I've heard what happens to towns they target." Nora watched through the window as the three mounted their horses and rode toward the town's only hotel. Her hand still hovered near the Colt, though she hadn't needed to draw it. "Yet," she said softly. "Yes, Jim. And they'll be back." "What's the plan?" he asked. Nora's mind was already racing, sifting through scenarios with the analytical precision that had once made her the West's most feared sharpshooter. "For now, we prepare. Have young Tommy watch the back entrance. Send word to Ellie at the telegraph office. I need to get a message out. And bring down the case from my office. The locked one." Jim's eyes widened. In 7 years, he'd never seen Nora open that case. "Yes, ma'am," he said, heading for the stairs to her private quarters above the saloon. Nora turned back to the window, watching Kane and his men disappear into the dusk. The Carson Syndicate had made a fatal miscalculation, seeing a lone widow where they should have seen a legend. Before she was Nora Caldwell, keeper of the last chance, she was Quicksilver Kane, a name that had echoed from Deadwood to Dodge City. A woman who'd outshot Wild Bill Hickok in a private wager, trained Pinkerton agents in marksmanship, and put 6 bullets through a silver dollar at 50 paces. The Syndicate thought they were hunting easy prey. They were about to learn what it meant to cross the West's deadliest sharpshooter. As the last rays of sunlight bled into the San Juan Mountains, Nora Caldwell stood at the window of her private quarters above the Last Chance Saloon, her slate-blue eyes tracking the fading silhouettes of Silas Kane and his men. The Carson Syndicate's arrival had shattered the fragile peace of Ironwood Falls, a mining town that had given her sanctuary after years of living by the gun. Now the past she'd buried was clawing its way back, and Nora knew the storm was only beginning. Big Jim Callahan returned, his heavy boots creaking on the oak floorboards. In his massive hands, he carried a cherrywood case, its brass fittings gleaming faintly in the lamplight. A silver and copper phoenix, wings spread in defiance, adorned the lid, a symbol of the woman Nora had once been. He set it on the bar with the reverence of a man, handling dynamite. "Gonna be trouble, ain't it, Miss Caldwell?" he asked, his deep voice tinged with certainty. Nora's fingers traced the phoenix, her touch lingering on the cool metal. "Yes, Jim. I reckon there will be." She drew a small key from a chain around her neck, the only adornment she allowed herself beyond her simple wedding band. The lock clicked open, and she lifted the lid to reveal a custom Winchester 1873, its walnut stock inlaid with silver feathers, the blued steel barrel pristine despite years of disuse. Nestled beside it was a gun belt holding twin Colt revolvers, their pearl grips customized to fit her hands like an extension of her soul. "I'd hoped these would stay locked away," she murmured, more to herself than Jim. Her fingertips brushed the Winchester, and memories flooded back. The roar of crowds as she split playing cards at 50 paces, the acrid bite of gunpowder, the perfect calm that settled over her when facing an impossible shot. For 7 years, she'd kept Quicksilver Kane buried alongside her husband, Henry, who'd given her a life beyond the trigger. But the Carson Syndicate had misjudged her, and now that part of her was stirring, ready to remind them why her name had once been a legend. "Send word to Judge Callahan in Durango," Nora instructed, her voice taking on a quiet authority Jim had never heard before. "Tell him Quicksilver sends her regards and needs intelligence on the Carson Syndicate's operations." Jim's eyes widened, realization dawning. "Quicksilver? You're the Quicksilver Kane. The one from them dime novels, outshot Buffalo Bill and trained the Pinkertons." Nora's lips curved in a wry smile as she sighted along the Winchester's barrel, muscle memory returning like an old friend. "The novels stretch the truth, Jim. Reality's more precise." She lowered the rifle. "The Syndicate doesn't know what they've stirred up. But they will." As dusk settled over Ironwood Falls, Nora began inspecting her firearms with meticulous care, each movement revealing the expertise of a master gunslinger. The Syndicate had come hunting what they thought was a helpless widow. Instead, they'd roused a predator from her self-imposed exile, and Ironwood Falls would bear witness to her return. Dawn over Ironwood Falls. The first light of dawn crept over the mountains, painting the sky in hues of gold and ash. Nora climbed to the roof of the Last Chance, moving with a fluid grace that would have stunned her regular patrons. Gone was the measured poise of a saloon keeper, replaced by the silent stalk of a hunter surveying her domain. From this perch, she had a clear view of Ironwood Falls Main Street, the Grandview Hotel where Kane and his men had taken rooms, and every approach to her saloon. She settled into a shadowed corner, the Winchester cradled in arms that remembered its weight perfectly. Her eyes scanned the sleeping town, calculating ranges and angles with mechanical precision. The hotel, 180 yards with a slight elevation. The livery stable, 85 yards with a clear shot to the door. The sheriff's office, now eerily empty, 120 yards, partially obscured by the barbershop's awning. Ironwood Falls had been her home for 7 years, but she'd never viewed it as a battlefield, until now. "Miss Caldwell," Big Jim's voice came softly from the roof hatch. "Coffee's ready." He climbed up, balancing 2 tin mugs, the steam curling in the chilly air. Handing one to Nora, he settled beside her, his bulk a reassuring presence. "Didn't peg you for rooftop musings." "Old habits," Nora replied, sipping the bitter brew. "Height brings clarity." Jim studied her in the growing light, noting the subtle shift in her posture, the constant sweep of her eyes. "Telegram came from Judge Callahan," he said, passing her a folded yellow paper. Ellie brought it over from the telegraph office. Nora unfolded the message, her eyes scanning the terse words. "Quicksilver, stop. Carson Syndicate expanding fast. Stop." 3 towns under their thumb, Stop. Marshall spread thin. Stop. Your actions have my blessing. Stop. Stay sharp, old friend. Stop. Callahan. She tucked the paper into her vest, her mind filing away the implications. Judge Michael Callahan, known as the hanging judge across the territories, was one of the few who knew her past as a Pinkerton operative. His blessing gave her leeway, though not official backing. I've been asking around, Jim continued. The Syndicate's got a system. They target key businesses, lean on owners till they break, then use those places to run their dirty money, cattle rustling, stagecoach heists, worse. Anyone who fights back gets burned out or disappears. Nora nodded, her gaze fixed on the hotel as the morning light strengthened. 3 more riders had arrived overnight, reinforcements. They are organized, Jim. Military precision. Someone with tactical experience is calling the shots. She raised the Winchester, using its scope to study the hotel. Tell me everything you know about Kane and the Carsons. Jim shifted, his face grim. Ezekiel Carson's the brains. Ex-Confederate officer, cashiered for something shady. His brother Malachi's the muscle, folks say. He cut down a dozen men in the border wars and liked it. Kane was Ezekiel's lieutenant during the war. Now he scouts targets, applies the squeeze, brings in the heavy guns when needed. He hesitated. That young one with Kane. They call him Rattler. Got a taste for knives. Likes to keep souvenirs. Nora's grip on the Winchester tightened, her face impassive but her eyes cold as winter steel. How many men total? Word is they roll with 10 to 20. Got at least a dozen camped outside town, planning to move in slow so folks don't spook. A dozen's a lot for a town this size, Nora said, her mind already mapping the terrain. Especially with Sheriff Dawson conveniently gone. Jim's concern deepened. Nora, I know you've got history with a gun, but these are killers. Maybe we should play along till the marshals can get here. Nora turned to face him, and Jim nearly flinched at the change in her eyes. Gone was the warm saloon keeper, replaced by a predator's unyielding stare. Jim, before I was Nora Caldwell, I was Quicksilver Kane. I didn't just perform trick shots for crowds. I worked with Pinkertons, the Army territorial marshals, hunted threats the law couldn't touch. She paused, letting the weight settle. Henry knew who I was. He gave me a chance to live without blood on my hands. But I won't let these men destroy what we built. What's the plan? Jim asked, a new respect in his voice. First, we gather intelligence. Know your enemy better than they know you. She rose, slinging the Winchester across her back with ease. The Syndicate thinks they're hunting a widow. That's our edge. Trouble at Clara's diner. As they descended to the saloon's main floor, Nora outlined her priorities. Track the Syndicate's movements, identify allies in town, and fortify the last chance for the fight ahead. What about evacuation? Jim asked. Some folks might want to hightail it before things get ugly. Arrange transport for anyone who wants out, especially families, Nora said. But keep it quiet. We can't tip Kane off that we're gearing up. She unrolled a map of Ironwood Falls, marked with tactical notations she'd made overnight. They'll set up lookouts here, and likely here, she said, pointing to vantage points along the main street. Their main force stays outside town till Kane calls them in. Jim studied the map, impressed. You've done this before. More times than I care to count, Nora said, her tone clipped. The saloon doors swung open, admitting Tommy Harper, the young barkeep who helped on busy nights. His freckled face was tight with worry. Miss Caldwell, trouble at Clara's diner, he reported. Kane and his men are tearing the place up. Nora's expression hardened. What kind of trouble? Smashing dishes, scaring customers, talking about how businesses here need to learn the new way of things. Nora moved to a glass case behind the bar. One patrons assumed held a standard shotgun for rowdy drunks. She unlocked it and withdrew a custom Henry repeating rifle, its sleek design fitted with a prototype sight she'd crafted herself. Jim, mind the saloon. Tommy, get to Ellie at the telegraph office. Tell her to wire Fort Collins. Find out where Marshal Brennan is. As she loaded the Henry with practiced ease, Jim placed a hand on her arm. You ain't planning to take on all three alone, are you? Nora slid the rifle into a concealed holster beneath her long coat, its tailored cut now revealing its true purpose. Not yet, Jim. I'm not engaging directly. But Clara's been good to me since I came to this town. I won't let her livelihood get wrecked while I sit here. She adjusted her coat and headed for the door, but Jim's voice stopped her. Nora, he said, concern heavy in his tone, if you show your cards too soon. She turned, her eyes blazing with the focus of a master gunslinger. I know exactly how much to show, Jim. Kane wants to flex his muscle for the town. I'm just gonna introduce a wrinkle he ain't counted on. Clara's Diner, a clapboard building 2 doors down from the Last Chance, was a hub of Ironwood Falls social life, where miners swapped tall tales over biscuits and gravy. By the time Nora approached, a small crowd had gathered outside, their faces a mix of fear and simmering anger. Through the diner's windows, she saw chaos. Overturned tables, shattered plates, and Clara Turner pressed against the wall, her face pale as Rattler twirled a knife inches from her cheek. Kane stood in the center, one hand on his holstered revolver, while Holt methodically smashed dishes behind the counter. Nora didn't rush. Her steps were measured, her right hand resting naturally near the hidden Henry. She cataloged details with a professional's detachment. Kane's position by the door, 8 feet from Rattler, Holt's gun still holstered as he focused on destruction. The bell above the door jingled softly as she entered, drawing every eye in the room. Gentlemen, she said, her voice carrying the calm authority that had once silenced rowdy saloons from Abilene to Cheyenne. You've made your point. Time to leave Clara's place before this gets worse. Kane's scarred face split into a mocking grin. Ms. Caldwell, playing the hero for your neighbor. Mighty noble, he gestured at the wreckage. Just showing Ms. Turner the risks of running a business without proper protection. Nora's gaze flicked to Clara, noting a thin trickle of blood where Rattler's knife had nicked her cheek. Something cold and lethal shifted in her eyes. Step away from her, she told Rattler, her voice dropping to a tone that made the young outlaw blink. Or what, lady? He sneered, though he took a half-step back, unnerved by her presence. Gonna pour me a whiskey. In a blur of motion, Nora's coat swept aside, and the Henry rifle appeared in her hands, held with the ease of a woman born to it. She didn't aim, merely cradled it, the threat implicit. My first ask was polite, she said, her voice now edged with steel. This one ain't. Step away from Clara, put the knife down and get out. The diner fell silent, the air thick with tension. Kane studied Nora, his eyes narrowing as he took in her stance, the rifle's custom sight, the absolute stillness that enveloped her. Well now, he drawled, seems the widow's got claws after all. He made a subtle gesture, and Rattler reluctantly backed off, his face sour with resentment. Just a friendly business chat, Kane continued, his tone light but his eyes sharp. No need for guns to join the conversation. Nora remained motionless, the Henry held in a ready position that could snap to aim in an instant. Your business here is done, Mr. Kane. I suggest you and your boys leave Ironwood Falls by sundown. Kane laughed, a sound devoid of warmth. Bold talk for a woman alone. She ain't alone, came a gravelly voice from the doorway. Amos Turner, Clara's brother, stood there, clutching an ancient but functional shotgun. Behind him, townsfolk had gathered, their fear giving way to defiance at the sight of their diner desecrated. Kane assessed the shifting odds, his tactician's mind recalculating. "We'll take our leave, Miss Caldwell," he said after a moment. But this ain't over, just paused. As he passed her, he leaned in, his voice low. "You ain't what you seem, are you? I'm mighty curious what else you're hidden." Nora didn't respond, holding her position until the three men mounted their horses and rode off. Only then did she lower the Henry, though she kept it in hand, a silent declaration that the time for pretense was over. Clara sagged against the wall, Amos rushing to her side. The diner was a shambles, broken crockery, spilled coffee, tables upended. "Thank you, Nora," Clara said, her voice trembling. "When that boy pulled his knife, I thought." Nora checked the cut on Clara's cheek, her touch gentle but firm. "It's gonna be all right, Clara. But listen close now." She turned to the townsfolk who'd entered, her voice taking on a commanding edge. "The Syndicate ain't leaving. This was just a taste, meant to scare you into thinking resistance is hopeless. They've done this in other towns, start with threats, move to blood, and end up owning everything worth having." "What can we do?" a voice called from the crowd. "Sheriff's gone, and the telegraph's likely watched." Nora straightened, and for a moment the townsfolk glimpsed the legend beneath the widow's veneer. "You do what needs doing," she said. "Protect your own, stand by your neighbors, and brace for trouble." As for Kane and his men, a cold smile touched her lips. "Leave them to me." Reconnaissance and interrogation. Dusk draped Ironwood falls in shades of indigo, the mountains looming like silent sentinels. Nora stood in her quarters, poring over maps of the town and surrounding valleys, each marked with precise notations in her flowing script. A knock preceded Big Jim's entrance, carrying a tray of coffee and biscuits she hadn't touched. "Kane's back at the Grandview," he reported. "Got lookouts at the livery and the mercantile's roof." 2 more riders came in from the east, 7 in town now, plus whatever's camped outside. Nora nodded, unsurprised. "And the fancy carriage?" "Rolled in just before dark," Jim said. "Black silver trim, curtains tight. Went straight to the hotel's back entrance." "Ezekiel Carson himself," Nora said softly. "He doesn't show his face till the ground's prepped. We've rattled him." Her smile was sharp as a blade. "When the head wolf leaves his den, he's exposed." Jim studied her maps, awed by their detail. "You've turned this whole valley into a war zone." "Preparation wins battles," Nora replied, tracing a route along a creek behind town. "This path gets us to the hotel's rear unseen. The mercantile storeroom covers the main street without being spotted." Her finger moved to ridge lines overlooking Ironwood Falls. "These spots give us eyes on every approach." "You've been planning this since you got here," Jim said, half in wonder. Nora's eyes flickered with old grief. "Henry used to rib me for it. Said I could turn a 4th of July picnic into a cavalry charge." She shook off the memory. "Who can we trust in town?" "After the diner, folks are picking sides," Jim said. "Shopkeepers are with us. They've seen towns gutted by gangs like Carson's. Miners are split. Some will fight, others just want to stay low. Every house has a gun, shotguns, rifles, some ammo from the mercantile. Real shooters. Amos is steady for his age. The O'Malley brothers from the Silver Vein mine, both Union vets. Doc Sullivan was a field medic, knows his way around a pistol. And Ellie Harper, the schoolmarm. Her pa was a buffalo hunter, Taught her to shoot before she could write. Good, Nora said. We'll need every hand. But intelligence comes first. She opened a trunk, revealing dark riding clothes she hadn't worn in years. Gather our people quietly at Clara's diner. Nobody'll blink at Folks Common and go in there. I'm heading out. Alone? Jim asked, worry creasing his brow. Always moved best alone, Nora said, her voice carrying the weight of experience. As Jim left to rally their allies, she changed into the dark attire, braiding her hair tightly and smearing lampblack on her face to dull reflections. The transformation was stark. Nora Caldwell, saloon keeper, vanished, replaced by Quicksilver Kane, a shadow who danced with the night. She slipped through a hidden exit she'd built into the saloon, emerging in an alley unseen by Kane's lookouts. Moving through Ironwood Falls backways, alleys, dry washes, forgotten yards, she navigated with the ease of a woman who'd mapped every inch of her territory. At the town's edge, she mounted a sleek black gelding, borrowed from the Silver Vein mine to avoid recognition, and took a deer trail into the foothills, using pine thickets for cover. From a ridge overlooking the valley, Nora studied Ironwood Falls through field glasses, its lights twinkling like stars in the darkness. Her patience paid off when she spotted a rider leaving town, taking a winding path toward a box canyon 2 miles out. A scout, likely heading to Carson's main camp. She followed at a distance, her senses honed from years tracking outlaws for the Pinkertons. The night carried sounds clearly. The hoot of an owl, the creak of the rider's saddle, the whisper of her own horse's hooves. The trail led to a hidden canyon, its entrance masked by boulders and scrub. Nora dismounted, securing her horse in a copse of aspen, and crept to a vantage point. Below, a disciplined camp sprawled, tents in neat rows, sentries posted with military precision, horses picketed in an orderly line. This was no ragtag outlaw hideout, but a professional operation. Nora counted 20 men, noted patrol patterns, and marked vulnerabilities. At the camp center stood a large tent, its canvas glowing with lantern light, shadows moving inside, likely Carson himself planning his next move. A twig snapped to her right, and Nora froze, blending into the shadows as a sentry passed within 10 feet. His deliberate steps and scanning eyes marked him as a cut above the usual bandit. She waited until he moved on, then withdrew silently, her mental map updated with every detail. The Syndicate's strength was formidable, but their discipline made them predictable, a weakness she could exploit. The interrogation. Dawn was breaking as Nora returned to a remote line, shack 3 miles from Ironwood Falls, a secret cache she'd maintained since arriving in town. Inside, by lantern light, she checked her equipment, ammunition, surveillance tools, and devices from her Pinkerton days. Big Jim met her, ducking under the low doorframe. O'Malley brothers are set on the eastern ridge, he reported. Charges placed like you wanted, enough to spook Carson's men without killing anyone. Rattlers in the root cellar, still out cold. Nora's expression darkened at the mention of Rattler. Anything else? Found a pouch on him, Jim said grimly. Full of human teeth. Trophies. Cold fury flashed in Nora's eyes, swiftly controlled. I figured as much. He's been with Carson from the start, knows their playbook. We'll get answers. Ellie Harper, the schoolmarm, arrived, her usual calico dress swapped for riding gear, a satchel in hand. Land office records, she said, spreading out documents. Every property deal in the territory for 3 years. Carson's crew uses shell companies, but the pattern's clear. They're buying up towns piece by piece. Nora scanned the papers, her mind piecing together the Syndicate's web. This ain't just crime, she said. It's a machine, Illegal cash funneled through legal fronts. They've got officials in 3 counties on their payroll. Ironwood Falls is just their latest prize. She noted a key detail. Sheriff Dawson's sick mother trip coincided with a property purchase in his name near Denver, far beyond his means. Leverage, she murmured. We'll use it. Ellie, go back to town, Nora instructed. Play the scared schoolmarm, keep the kids home. Jim, take these records to Judge Callahan in Durango. Tell him marshals are coming with a bigger file. This is just the start. As they left, Nora approached the root cellar, where Rattler sat bound to a chair, his lean face defiant despite his predicament. Well, if it ain't the widow herself, he drawled, recognition glinting in his eyes. Or is it Quicksilver Kane, the dime novel queen? Names don't matter, Nora said, setting a lantern to cast stark light. What matters is what you know about Carson's outfit. Rattler's laugh was brittle. You think you can scare me? Carson do worse if I talk. I don't do threats, Nora said, sitting across from him, her gaze unyielding. I'm offering a deal. Tell me about Carson's operation. Numbers, plans, the colonel who rolled in last night. You talk, you get options. Stay quiet, those options vanish. Options? Rattler's voice held a mix of suspicion and curiosity. Depends on what you give me, Nora said. A quick end, a cell far from Carson's reach, or maybe a fresh start, new name, ticket to California, enough cash to vanish. She watched his face, catching the spark of interest. Your call. After a long silence, Rattler nodded. Ask your questions. No promises, but I'm listening. Nora leaned forward, her voice cold and precise. Start with the colonel. Who is he and what's his role? The interrogation had begun. By morning, Nora would have the intelligence to dismantle the Carson Syndicate, one calculated step at a time. Dawn broke over Ironwood Falls, the San Juan Mountains glowing like molten gold against a sky of bruised clouds. The town lay silent, its streets empty, shutters drawn and doors barred, a community braced for war. No miners trudged to their claims, no merchants swept their stoops, no children raced to the schoolhouse. Ironwood Falls held its breath, waiting for the storm to break. On the roof of the Last Chance Saloon, Nora Caldwell stood as still as a statue, her Winchester 1873 cradled in arms that betrayed no fatigue despite a sleepless night. Her slate-blue eyes, sharp as a hawk's, swept the town with methodical precision. The Carson Syndicate had turned Ironwood Falls into an armed camp overnight. Pairs of men patrolled with military discipline, their boots kicking up dust on the main drag. The Grandview Hotel, now a fortress, bristled with guards at every entrance, snipers perched on its roof. Barricades blocked key intersections, choking the town's heart. Nora counted silently, 27 men. Carson's original force, bolstered by reinforcements that had ridden in under cover of darkness. At least 8 bore the unmistakable posture of trained soldiers, including the mysterious colonel, whose arrival had shifted Carson's strategy from intimidation to outright conquest. Big Jim Callahan joined her, his broad face etched with the gravity of the coming fight. Judge Callahan got the documents, he reported, his voice low. Sent riders to the territorial marshal and the governor. Says warrants for Carson, and his whole outfit'll be ready by nightfall. Nightfall's too late, Nora said, her tone carrying the icy precision of Quicksilver Kane, not the warm cadence of the saloon keeper. She adjusted her field glasses, studying the hotel. Look at their setup. They're moving before noon. Jim followed her gaze. Men loaded wagons with gear, while others fortified defensive positions. They're pulling out. Not leaving, Nora corrected. Consolidating. Carson, switching to his backup plan, seize key buildings, take hostages, force the town to kneel before help arrives. The colonel's presence has them thinking like an army, not a gang. She checked her pocket watch, a silver heirloom from her Pinkerton days. "What's our status?" "O'Malley brothers are set on the eastern ridge," Jim said. "Charges rigged for remote detonation, just like you wanted. Amos and his miners are ready at the Silver Vein shaft, tunnels modified per your specs. Carson's captured men are locked in the church basement under Doc Sullivan's watch. 5 total, including Rattler, all disarmed and tied up tight." Nora nodded, her mind finalizing calculations. Overnight, she'd executed the first phase of her plan, silently neutralizing isolated pairs of Carson's men during their patrols. Each disappearance had sown confusion, forcing Carson to spread his forces thin. "It's time," she said, slinging the Winchester across her back. "Signal the O'Malleys to trigger Plan Thunder in 30 minutes. Get word to Amos. Operation Flood starts on my mark." As Jim left to relay her orders, Nora descended to her quarters. Spread across her oak desk were the fruits of her intelligence: Rattler's coerced confessions, intercepted telegrams, and Ellie Harper's land records. Together, they painted a chilling picture. Ezekiel Carson wasn't just a criminal. He was a mastermind, his syndicate a sprawling empire spanning 3 territories. A former Confederate officer, Carson had leveraged his tactical acumen to blend robbery, extortion, and cattle rustling with legitimate fronts: saloons, banks, even churches. The colonel, identified by Rattler as Nathan Hargrove, was a disgraced Army intelligence officer, cashiered for treason but untouchable due to political allies. Hargrove's arrival 6 months ago had supercharged the Syndicate's expansion, bringing elite mercenaries and insider knowledge. Nora studied her map of Ironwood Falls one last time, mentally rehearsing each phase. The odds were brutal: 27 professional gunmen against her small band of townsfolk. But Quicksilver Kane had never relied on numbers. She thrived on strategy, turning an enemy's strength into their undoing. She changed swiftly, donning dark trousers, a fitted vest with hidden pockets, and a long coat tailored to conceal weapons. Her twin Colts slid into custom holsters, the Winchester slung across her back, and specialized tools: gas projectors, lockpicks, a wrist-sheathed knife, tucked into concealed compartments. The transformation was complete. Nora Caldwell, the widow, was gone. Quicksilver Kane, the legend, stood ready. A soft knock announced Ellie Harper's arrival. The schoolmarm, now in practical riding gear, her hair braided tight, reported with quiet efficiency: "Kids and non-fighters are safe in the mine shaft. 3 days' supplies, armed guards at the entrance, secondary exit to the high country if things go south." Nora nodded approval. "Signal system." 3 lantern flashes for all clear. "Anything else, they stay hidden and wait for marshals." Ellie hesitated, then asked, "You think this'll work, Nora?" "Your plan?" Nora met her gaze, steady and unyielding. "It's not about guarantees, Ellie. It's about making their strengths our weapons and their plans our traps. Carson's smart, but he thinks like a general, force against force. He won't see us coming till it's too late." A faint smile touched her lips. The dime novels got one thing right: Quicksilver Kane doesn't miss. As Ellie left to take her position, Nora made her final preparations. Every angle had been calculated, every contingency mapped. Now, execution would decide the day. Plan Thunder and Operation Flood. Exactly 30 minutes later, the eastern ridge erupted in a series of deafening explosions, the O'Malley brothers' charges detonating in precise sequence. Through her field glasses, Nora watched Carson's men snap into action, forming defensive lines, their rifles trained on what they believed was a full-scale assault. The ruse worked perfectly. Carson split his forces, sending 15 men to secure the ridge while keeping 12 in town to hold key positions. The division created the opening she needed. Nora activated a small signaling device, a telegraph key wired to a hidden relay, sending the prearranged code to Amos and his miners. Operation Flood was go. She descended to the saloon's main floor, where Tommy Harper waited with the specialized gear she'd prepared. Canisters of smoke compound, rigged to ignite on command. "Timing's everything, Tommy," she instructed. "When the church bell rings, not a second sooner. Then fall back to the defensive positions. No heroics. Your job's to keep them guessing, not fight." Tommy nodded, his young face set with determination. "Understood, Miss Caldwell." Nora placed a hand on his shoulder. "This ain't a dime novel shootout, Tommy. Stick to the plan and we all walk away." With a final nod, she slipped through the saloon's hidden exit, emerging into a town transformed into a battlefield. The ridge explosions continued, punctuated by gunfire from the O'Malley's choreographed deception. No real targets, just noise and chaos to sell the illusion. Using her network of alleys and service passages, Nora moved undetected. Carson's men too focused on external threats to notice danger within their lines. She reached the church tower, a perfect vantage point overlooking the town center. Through her glasses, she saw Ezekiel Carson on the Grandview Hotel's second floor, directing operations with a general's confidence. Beside him stood Colonel Nathan Hargrove, silver-haired and ramrod-straight, his presence radiating authority. Their position near the window, with clear lines to the ridge, made them ideal targets for a sniper. But Nora's plan wasn't assassination. It was annihilation of the Syndicate itself. She signaled Amos, waiting near the water tower with a flash of her pocket mirror. Moments later, a low rumble shook the ground. Amos and his miners had diverted Silver Vein Creek through old mining tunnels beneath the town, channeling water into storm drains. A steady flow surged down the main street, not enough to destroy but plenty to sow confusion. Carson's men scrambled, abandoning elevated positions to deal with the unexpected flood, their attention drawn downward, away from the rooftops where Nora's allies were moving into place. Nora drew her precision rifle, a sleek prototype she designed for Pinkerton missions, its sights calibrated for extreme accuracy. She aimed not at Carson but at the hotel's weather vane, a copper stallion atop the roof. Her shot was flawless, the vane shattering in a spray of metal that echoed like a cannon across the town. To Carson's men it was random damage. To Big Jim, stationed in the Mercantile's bell tower, it was the signal to act. The church bell tolled, its irregular peals cutting through the chaos. Across Ironwood Falls, Nora's smoke canisters ignited, spewing thick clouds that enveloped the town center. Visibility dropped to mere feet, neutralizing Carson's snipers and scattering his ground forces. The smoke was an old ally to Nora, a trick she'd used in countless operations. While it blinded the Syndicate, she navigated by memory, moving toward the hotel with the grace of a phantom. Shouts and gunfire filled the artificial fog as Carson's men struggled to regroup. Nora reached the hotel's rear entrance, dispatching a lone guard with a silent, non-lethal strike to the neck. She secured him with quick-tie restraints and slipped inside. The lobby had become a command post, maps and telegraph forms strewn across the desk, guarded by two of Carson's men. They never saw her approach until her Colt pressed against one's spine. "Hands up," she said softly. "No sudden moves." The men complied, recognizing the futility of resistance. "Second floor," Nora asked, her tone brooking no delay. "Room 212, one answered. "Carson and the Colonel, two guards at the door." Nora nodded, rendering both unconscious with precise pressure point strikes, a technique learned from a Chinese operative years ago. She avoided the main staircase, too exposed, and took the service stairs, ascending silently. Through a stairwell window, she saw the smoke beginning to thin. Time was running out. Outside room 212, two guards stood vigilant, their military training evident. A direct fight would draw attention, so Nora deployed a compressed gas projector, a device of her own design loaded with a disorienting compound. The soft hiss drew their notice, but the fast-acting gas dropped them before they could fire. The noise alerted the room's occupants, and as the door opened, Nora struck, her Colt's butt felling the emerging guard with surgical precision. She stepped into the doorway, her Colt aimed steady as a rock. Ezekiel Carson and Colonel Nathan Hargrove stood at a map-covered table, both armed but caught off guard. Carson's hand twitched toward his revolver, but froze as Nora's gaze pinned him. "I wouldn't," she said, her voice a quiet blade. "Not if you want to leave this room alive." Carson's expression shifted from shock to calculation. "Miss Caldwell," he said, his southern drawl smooth despite the circumstances. "Or should I say Quicksilver Kane? Your legend's bigger than I expected." "Hands on the table," Nora ordered, ignoring the flattery. Hargrove complied with stiff dignity, his eyes studying her with professional curiosity. "Remarkable," Hargrove said. "Diversions, flooding, smoke, textbook asymmetrical warfare." West Point would applaud. "Save the praise," Carson snapped, his hands flat on the table. "What's your play, Ms. Caldwell? You can't arrest us all." "That's exactly what's happening," Nora said, her Colt unwavering. "5 of your men are in custody. The rest are scattered, blind, and facing townsfolk who have had enough of your tyranny. Territorial marshals are en route with warrants for your entire operation. Conspiracy, fraud, extortion, murder across 3 territories." Carson's composure cracked, surprise flickering in his eyes. "Warrants? Based on what?" "Your ledgers, property records, bank transactions," Nora said, a cold smile curving her lips. "While you were flexing muscle, I was collecting the evidence to bury you. Ellie Harper's brother has been building a case for years. You picked the wrong town to bully." Hargrove's posture sagged, realization dawning. "The schoolmarm. She got the territorial files." Nora didn't confirm, her focus absolute. "One option, gentlemen, surrender. Order your men to stand down and face justice through the law." Carson's laugh was hollow. "Or you'll shoot us. That ain't the Quicksilver Kane from the stories, the one who brought men in alive." "Stories lie," Nora said, her voice chilling the room. 7 years ago, I buried that life to become Nora Caldwell, a woman who chose peace. But you threatened my home, my people, the town that gave me a new start. Don't bet on my limits." Gunfire erupted outside, not the controlled bursts of her earlier deception, but the chaotic clamor of real combat. Carson's face lit with satisfaction. "Seems my men are rallying. Your plan's unraveling, Miss Caldwell." Nora didn't flinch, her focus unbroken. "Big Jim," she called, eyes still on Carson. Jim appeared, shotgun ready, and took her place guarding the prisoners. Nora moved to the window, assessing the street below. Carson's men had regrouped, holding a defensive line outside the hotel, trading shots with townsfolk behind barricades. The situation was spiraling toward bloodshed, the outcome she'd designed her plan to avoid. She turned back to Carson, her voice iron. "Call them off. Now, Carson smirked. Or what? Nora raised her precision rifle, sighting through the window with eerie calm. Her first shot struck a water barrel above Carson's men, unleashing a deluge that broke their formation. Before the echo faded, she fired again, severing a rope holding stacked crates on the mercantile's dock. The crates crashed down, blocking the street and forcing Carson's men to scatter or be trapped. That was a warning, Nora said, leveling the rifle at Carson. The next one won't be. Carson stared, reassessing the woman before him. Her unyielding gaze convinced him. Moving to the window, he shouted, "Stand down. All of you drop your weapons." For a moment the gunfire continued, defiance lingering. Then slowly Carson's men emerged, hands raised, as townsfolk covered them with rifles, shotguns, and even pitchforks. Nora watched through her scope, ensuring every man surrendered before lowering her rifle, though her posture remained vigilant. "Impressive," Hargrove said, his tone grudgingly admiring. "You've dismantled a criminal empire without a single death. I'm not sure if I'm awed or humiliated." Nora ignored him, her mind already on the next steps. "Jim, take these two to the church basement with the others. Double guards, separate cells, no communication." As Jim led the prisoners away, Nora surveyed Ironwood Falls from the window. The town bore scars, flooded streets, pockmarked buildings, shattered windows, but it stood unbroken, its spirit intact. Below, townsfolk embraced, relief washing over them like a prairie wind. Clara Turner organized aid for the wounded, none critical, while Amos directed cleanup. Nora felt a tangle of emotions, pride, grief, and a quiet revelation. For 7 years, she'd suppressed Quicksilver Kane, believing that part of her was a relic of violence. Yet today, those skills had saved the town she called home. Henry's words echoed in her mind, spoken on his deathbed. "Don't bury who you are, Nora. Find a better purpose for those gifts." She'd thought he meant returning to her old life. Now she saw the truth. Her skills could protect, not just destroy. Ironwood Falls had given her a second chance, and she'd repaid that debt, forging a new path where Quicksilver Kane and Nora Caldwell could coexist. Hooves thundered on the western approach, and Nora's hand twitched toward her Colt, alert for new threats. But the riders wore the silver badges of territorial marshals, summoned through Ellie's connections. Their timing was impeccable. Carson's men were in custody, the town secure, and evidence preserved for prosecution. Justice would prevail, not through vigilantism, but through the law Nora had orchestrated. As she descended to meet the marshals, Nora made a choice. Quicksilver Kane wouldn't vanish again, but neither would Nora Caldwell. Both could serve Ironwood Falls, the sharpshooter who defended the helpless, and the saloon keeper who anchored a community. The town had been her sanctuary, now she was its guardian. The sun climbed higher, bathing Ironwood Falls in golden light. The Last Chance Saloon stood as it always had, weathered but unbowed, a mirror of its owner. Tomorrow its doors would swing open, piano music would spill into the night, and glasses would clink as townsfolk shared tales of the day. A widow revealed herself as the West's deadliest sharpshooter. But today there was work to do, prisoners to secure, a town to heal, and a future to build. Nora stepped into the street, her shoulders squared, ready for whatever lay ahead. Precision had always been her hallmark, and in Ironwood Falls she'd found a purpose worthy of her aim.